It's hot outside, and we're only a month into it feeling like summer. Every year, it feels like the heat waves somehow take everyone by surprise as we huddle in our air conditioning, downing water and hoping for rain to break the humidity. For those that don't have AC, it can be unbearable or even deadly. But that's only been around for a few decades. So, what did we do before that? How did people a century or two ago deal with weeks of 90 or 100-degree temperatures? Did that even happen? Well, short answer on that part, yes, it happened. And they came up with inventions, schedules, methods, and article after article on how you too could keep cool. Hopefully, some of what we've forgotten can help us out in the coming months. I'm genuinely going to be implementing some of this, just saying that ahead of time. Between clothing, the home, food, and activities, they had dealing with the heat down to an art and a science. Turns out there have been quite a few massive heat waves over the last few centuries. I'm focused mostly on the US because that's the weather I know, but every region of the world has their own history of it and their own way of dealing with it. I would be remiss, however, to not mention the Great Stink of London in 1858, seeing as I just did a video about the history of plumbing, and well, where to send wastewater to get it out of the city is the big question that summer asked. But in July of 1845, here, they were recalling the summer of 1811. In 1881, there were enough days near or over 100 degrees in the Midwest that there were forest fires around the Great Lakes due to drought. That's not normal. In 1896, it stretched from Chicago to the Northeast and had a death toll of around 1,500. New York City was particularly hard hit. In 1911, both the US and the UK set records that would take decades to break. Most of the 1930s had heat waves in the western US that led to the Dust Bowl. After that point, it's basically every 1 to 4 years that there's another massive heat wave and often drought that follows somewhere across the US. There's a page on Wikipedia that's just a list of global heat waves, and we'd be here all day on just the 21st century. The point is that while heat waves are far more prevalent now with climate change, they did still happen, at least as far back as we really kept track of that sort of thing. And they were often just as intense when it comes to temperatures. Between that and the regular summer heat or just life in the South, they had to have ways to manage. Otherwise, society would have crumbled to a bunch of grumpy, sweaty, and miserable people a long time ago. If there is anything that will wilt him and bring to the surface all of the perverseness and petulancy of his animal nature, that thing is certainly a little too much fervency in the condition of the atmosphere. People are grumpy when it's hot out. Starting with clothing. The most useful, as we can't always be inside, nor can we always have control over what we need to be doing. Clothing carries with us all day and night, and quite bluntly, we are awful at adjusting modern clothing to deal with the weather. At least lately, we've had a rise in linen options like the sponsor for today's video, Quince. I basically live in linen all summer and wool all winter, and Quince has me handled for both, whether it's loose and comfy options like this linen maxi skirt that has pockets, elastic waist, and a really adorable little slit, or things like this linen and cotton mix sweater tank, which is genuinely the breeziest thing that I own. Or something more polished but still cute, like these wide-legged trousers with their patch pockets in front, or this pop over top with its adorable collar, or the thing I have been looking for months, the perfect linen dress that I can throw on when I can't be bothered to figure out an outfit, or can be layered with other things as the weather starts to cool down. Big pockets, by the way. And it has smocking in back, so it's not going to be annoyingly tight when you're hot and sweaty. It comes in a ton of gorgeous colors and patterns as well. And just in case you like lighter colors, it is fully lined, so no see-through. The best part is all of these pieces are well below average retail. Quince is that middleman that I told you about in the last video where I was talking about clothing manufacturing. Instead of clothing being made by one manufacturer being sold to a company who then sells it to another big company, and everyone just keeps putting their profits on top of that, Quince doesn't have that extra step, so they are able to keep the prices low while still having great quality. And if you are looking ahead to cooler weather, they have so many designs in silk and wool as well. So if you are looking to upgrade your closet and your home for the season, be sure to check out Quince. Go to the link in my description or use my QR code to get free shipping and 365-day returns.
Having a heat wave, a tropical heat wave. Well, now the temperature's rising, it isn't surprising, they certainly can.
Linen is by far the optimal hot weather option when it comes to any humidity. It wants to take moisture, absorb it, and evaporates it quickly. That was its job inside of the flax plant, which means it stays cool to the touch, even with the slightest breeze, which was especially important if you're stuck wearing multiple layers. Underclothing should absorb and evaporate perspiration and keep the skin clean. What it should be made out of, though, was a constant argument. At least this article, advertising an invention by Dr. Henry L. Dymel, claimed to know the answer. A linen woven to be porous and soft, thus termed linen mesh, which does sound insanely cooling. And there are tons of mesh undergarments to be found in this era. I promise these aren't like fishnet bodysuits. The more essential bits get plain woven fabric coverage. Wool was sometimes recommended for hot weather, but not the heavy and scratchy stuff. It's far better at managing to stay dry to the touch rather than cool, so it won't help with the humidity in the same way. It is an insulator, however, so in extreme dry heat, it can keep the temperature out. It just needs to be worse than your own body temp. Frankly, wool as underwear that would stay feeling dry, and linen as outerwear that keeps cool sounds pretty ideal at this point. But they would all agree on one thing that we're terrible about. Stop wearing cotton. They would also really hate any sort of synthetic. That would be so much worse. That's not the point. One article from 1898 even complained about its use in tiny places like pockets or reinforcements in trousers. Cotton was well known to stay damp, and not in the cool and comfortable way, in the causes chafing way, not to mention sweat stains. But this is one of the major reasons why today we wear less and less and less clothing when it gets hot out, because our clothing doesn't breathe, doesn't evaporate, doesn't allow us to perspire and have that go away. Just stays or gets trapped in there. So they didn't have to worry about basically wearing next to nothing in order to stay cool. In fact, that's way worse. But additionally, they recognized just how important the color of the clothing was. Darker colors absorb more heat, so white or light tones were ideal. The downside to this is that the sun does make it through those layers and can still burn you. Hence, some desert attire is black. I love this idea of 1907 of weaving the two together so that the exterior layer, which can be very thin, is white, while black or something dark is underneath. Because in the end, you need to cover up to stay out of the sun. Not just because they didn't have sunscreen, but because the sun heats up your body way faster than the right fabric. We always say it's better to bake than broil. Loose white linen that covers as much of the body as possible is ideal for most situations. That's what they recommended then, and based on both science and my own experience, that's what's best now too. For farmers and laborers, they would choose to wear smocks instead of jackets or coats most of the year already. In the summer, they mention wearing a gauze undershirt near the body, extremely thin and breathable, but with a coarser overshirt or smock to keep the sun off and be sturdy enough for the hard work. In some ways, the white-collar workers had it worse off. Stuck inside buildings with formal requirements for dress, often in cities that were far worse for heat. It wasn't uncommon for dress codes to be lowered during heat waves, with men working in just plain shirts and unbuttoned collars. Scandal. Don't wear a waistcoat and get rid of suspenders if your waist will provide sufficient moral support to certain portions of your apparel. If your pants won't fall down. That is why that underwear discussion was so important. There's only so many layers to remove before it's actually creating a different problem. Decency. Some men would wear fake shirt fronts with nothing, or just net in the back. Suit coats were no longer made of wool and fully lined with internal structural layers, but were made from a single layer of linen, cotton, or things like piña cloth. This example of piña cloth from Genesee is completely unlined and as lightweight as possible. Others had removable buttons with the intention of being washable. In fact, washing was the main method of dealing with summer clothing. Steamed on the body, boiled in the kettle, dried in the sun, and made wet again by that very sun as soon as it has been dried. Most recommendations were for changing at least once midday to keep clean. Summer clothing was generally meant to be heavily laundered, unlike structured outerwear garments of the winter, which I suppose we do keep to that concept. Maybe not the changing multiple times a day, but certainly the laundering of all clothing. But just in case that all seems too obvious or mundane, there is the preferred hat secret of the 19th century. Not just swapping out dark animal hair felt hats for straw or a larger brim to keep shaded. No, no. They recommended a horseradish, cabbage leaf, hickory, or plantain leaf kept wet with cool water under the hat. A small, light cloth can also do the same. Straw hats are cooler if loosely woven, but will let the sun through. So they'd stuff the inside with plant matter or line it with yellow or green tissue paper. I even came across one version of a top hat that had a small lining midway up to hold cool vegetable fiber that would keep the hat cool inside but not sit directly on your head. And I can also vouch that these are all really good ideas for keeping your head cool. This is something that I regularly did at Colonial Williamsburg. Managing to cool down the head can make such a big difference. We also stuck freezer pops down our stays. I don't think that's a historically accurate suggestion, but they would have if they could have. The home is the next item of importance in keeping cool. The majority of homes in areas that reach uncomfortable levels of heat regularly are now built with air conditioning in mind, at least in the US. Some of the changes have been subtle, like taller ceilings or placing vents or intakes at ceiling level rather than the floor. Knowing that heat rises and cool falls, vents lower down only really help with heat. Things like double pane windows help with all weather, as does insulation between the walls. Previously, homes were built with much thicker walls and separate rooms to keep temperatures like heat from the kitchen out of the rest of the building. In the South, and especially in larger homes, kitchens were placed in separate buildings or basements. Some 20th century articles still recommended having a summer kitchen in the basement. Homes were built based on local materials, more so than just weather. Stucco is more common in the Southwest, limestone in the Midwest, bricks are found everywhere but vary by local mud. Wood siding was used for cheaper options in forest-heavy areas, but does struggle with heavy moisture, which is also a local issue depending on the tree species that's around. Interior wood framing does help in all of these cases just because it can be filled with insulation and create an air gap. But that wasn't always an easy option before we had cheap ways of filling that space, and it does far more to keep the heat in. Instead, houses had layouts intended to help. Sleeping porches and other open-air rooms, breezeways down the middle with doors on either end, window placement that helped move air throughout very specific rooms or an entire floor, before we had to worry about lot directions and streets that you had to match your house up to. Which way you angle the house could be decided by the sun and the wind. Even our windows. My original ones are double hung so I can open the top and the bottom at the same time and get the best air movement circulating through for cooling off. Even hard floors, like tile or wood instead of carpet, can make a space feel cooler. An 1887 article recommended covering rugs with canvas cloth, velvet chairs with white cotton sateen, hanging white curtains, and otherwise making the space feel smooth and bright rather than warm and cozy. Things that might help when the other recommendations are usually to close up the windows as much as possible during the day. Truly, the sun is the biggest culprit when it comes to heat inside. The sun is a deadly laser.
The sun is a deadly laser.
The trick is to open windows only at night and shut them up when the sun arrives. So basically, from 9 a.m. till 5 or 6 p.m., you need to have the window shut. If it is a particularly breezy day, blinds can allow the wind through and block out most of the sun. Awnings are also a popular option for providing shade to open windows. At one point, there was an awning running the entire width of the front of my house to keep the front porch out of the summer sun. Instead, now it has AC and storm windows to help with insulation, but I'm still in the process of adding UV blocking film to all of the windows and making light blocking shades for all but the north side of the house. I swear it's a difference of at least 10 degrees near the naked windows, even with regular drapes. I'm not in the bedrooms most of the day, so they can be dark to stay cool, since the upstairs in this house is so much warmer than downstairs. If you couldn't angle your house to deal with the sun or shut all of the windows up, make the garden work for you. Plant shade trees on the south and west of the house, poplar near the living room because of the way the leaves tremor in the breeze, make it feel like more movement is happening. There used to be a few more trees on the western side of my house based on the stumps, but it seems like they outgrew their space a long time ago and were extricated. A good reason to plant something by the big south windows sooner rather than later, then. Furniture could also be reworked for hot weather. Instead of stuffing with down or wool, filling cushions with excelsior, tiny wood curls, or even newspaper would hold less body heat. Spring mattresses were also recommended over felt for the same reason. Considering that nearly all of our modern upholstered things are made of and stuffed with synthetics today that definitely don't breathe, I can only imagine how much heat those hold. Things really started to change quickly around the end of the 19th century. Electricity opened up an entire range of options, most of them based around the fan. The first ceiling fan, as we know it, was invented in 1882 and was literally the motor from a Singer sewing machine. Prior to this, fans relied on manpower or things like water turbines. So, yes, rotary fans, flat styles like punkas, were around but very limited due to cost. Once we electrified them, however, they completely changed cooling, not just by moving the air around a room without needing a natural breeze, but by the many variations of running that air across cold surfaces first. Ice was, of course, a starting place, but even mixed with salt, it didn't last too long and required a drip tray that needed to be regularly emptied. Same thing as early ice boxes and refrigerators. Other inventions used various chemicals that dropped temperature when exposed to water, like saltpeter or ammonia gas. Some ran through pipes, sometimes the same pipes that carried hot steam the other part of the year, while others continue to use the fan system of blowing across moisture. We still use this basic premise today. We just have a loop system of turning the liquid into vapor and then back to liquid again. But genuinely, the concept could be achieved with a fan and a bowl of ice, or even a damp cheesecloth. The most common advice I came across, therefore probably the most often ignored, is on how to eat properly in hot weather, which mostly came down to eat lightly and consume cooled, not cold, drinks slowly. Hot drinks were also considered fine, but the process of heating them produced, well, unnecessary heat. Same thing with most cooking in general, hence the menu was completely shifted to do a small amount of cooking and baking early in the day, and then consume smaller meals of what is basically a charcuterie board or salads for the remainder. The health department recommended cutting out meat and greasy things. Instead, focus on fruits, vegetables, salads, milk, and cereals. Shredded wheat was specifically called out as a good option with fruit and dairy. Their premise, which is accurate, is that some foods take a lot more energy to digest, thus heating up your body. Ironic that our traditional summer fare in the US is based around grilling, mostly meats cooked over a source of major heat. Ice cold drinks as well. The thing is, if you consume something really cold, your body has to warm it up. If you or any pets, for that matter, end up overheating, you are supposed to stick to cool or room temperature liquids, not shock the system with ice water. They did actually have plenty of ways to cool their drinks before refrigeration, however, beyond ice stores, which were giant blocks harvested in the winter and placed in cold, dark cellars, hoping to make it through most of the rest of the summer before they melted away. There were more scientific options. Back to those coolants from before, saltpeter and sal ammoniac were recommended as a way to artificially cool beverages as far back as the 18th century. You didn't put them in your drink, you just put your drink bottles or containers into the, it's safe. Both have an endothermic reaction in water and get very cold. Sal ammoniac, ammonium chloride, is actually what is used in many freezer packs today. It would have been relatively expensive at the time, hence it wasn't commonly used by everyone. Instead, many used porous earthenware to keep water cooler, which this 1848 article does appropriately credit to regions like Egypt and India for using that regularly and coming up with it first. There were also refreshing drink recipes that needed no ice. Many were just essentially shrubs or switchels, strawberry and raspberry vinegar mixed with sugar, water, and sometimes ice, water, apple cider vinegar, sweetener, and ginger. Both ginger and vinegar are the standard additions to these styles of drinks. Ginger helps to settle the stomach, and vinegar helps with hydration, sort of like the electrolytes that we commonly drink today. This 1870 recipe of ginger, sugar, and cream of tartar is basically describing ginger beer. Add black tea, and then you've got kombucha. Others recommended adding a little claret to ice lemonade, soda, or mineral water, or cider, all regularly popular summer drinks, and still found today. One of my favorite coffee shops in town has the most amazing shrub that I am still trying to recreate so I can make it at home during the rest of the year when they don't have it. There was, however, one very weird hot weather food that I came across. It was advertised as a pre-digested food called pascola, as palatable as lemonade. I doubt that. It seems to have been glucose and digestive enzymes, likely something from pineapple, since that's featured on their bottles. What is actually in it is not just a modern curiosity. It was part of a massive court trial where the company was brought in by Ohio's early food and beverage regulators. The issue was that if the drink was just glucose, like many other ones were, it could pose a risk to those who are diabetic, and that would need labeling. The doctor, loose term there, who sold it, also admitted that he had not done research into how it worked and had very little knowledge of the entire digestive system or what the body actually needed in terms of nutrients. I'm just going to stick with pickles, thank you. Their ideas around activities might be the most unlike our own. Some did claim the best way to keep cool was a good conscience and clean, calm demeanor, which, beyond fighting, mostly came down to don't complain about being hot because then you'll be thinking about it and make everyone else think about it. Some even said it's the right time to pay your bills to keep others from being annoyed. A clear heart is like a palace ornamented with pure and gushing fountains, and filled with the sweets of odoriferous plants. There were multiple articles that I came across where the entire thing started off with, "We have this big secret for keeping cool in the summer heat, and everyone forgets it. No one knows it. Be a good person." Yeah, the rage that that would have caused me in that moment would have definitely heated me up. But being actually practical, the wealthy had it the easiest. They left the stuffy cities and spent their summers at the seashore, in more northern vacation spots, or at least doing as little as possible. They would change multiple times a day to stay clean, take a bath midday and evening at least, and choose to go for walks early in the morning or late in the evening with parasol or large hat so as to not be entirely sedentary. Be as phlegmatic as an immaculated mackerel, one 1872 article recommends. I clearly have not spent enough time around mackerel to fully grasp what this means. For most labor based jobs, especially farming, work could stop until 5 or 6 after a light midday meal. Same goes for the housekeeper who gets up at 4 or 5 in the morning, works while it's still cool out, and is done by noon. Just be sure to never work so hard as to be too tired to sleep. In fact, it was considered far smarter to plan for the entire summer to be lazy. Spring is the busiest time for projects so that there can be less work later. No elaborate meals, just simple options planned out in May when the weather is still agreeable, which makes total sense when you think about spring cleaning now. Just getting rid of all of the things that might get in your way over the summer, all of the clutter that might make you feel too hot, all of the unfinished projects you will not want to do in July. Baking and ironing, something that has to happen constantly, do happen before breakfast, which is fine because you should take a bath and go to bed right after dinner. Basically, get up really early, start up all the hot things like laundry and cooking, eat breakfast, finish your chores, eat dinner, which for this writer is midday, and then essentially take a really good nap from 12 to at least 2. Maybe return to some light activities until after 5 at the most. For white collar workers, they would spend their early afternoons stripped down and laying out in parks. There are some great photos from the heat wave of 1911 of this happening in Central Park. This is well before the 40-hour work week or 9 to 5 came into play, so hours were adjusted to deal with the temperature. Start earlier, stop around noon, and don't start up again until 3 or 4 or even later if you do at all. It was too hot, was considered a valid reason to not get work done, regardless of your job.
It's too darn hot.
Of course, plenty of manufacturing jobs worked straight through in cramped city spaces, which must have been unbearable, but for those who had any control over their schedule, work pretty much stopped in the summer. And yes, there are plenty of regions around the world where that is still the standard. We've just normalized the regular workday so much here that we've forgotten to adjust for things like the sun and weather, which is crazy because it's been less than a century of 9 to 5. There's actually a bill to bring it down to 30 hours a week over the next few years. Maybe that should be the next video topic. But for now, the summer weather is not something that we all have to fully suffer through. Even if you don't have air conditioning all of the time or at all, there are plenty of things that we have been doing for decades, if not centuries, in order to stay cool. Whether it's just various ways of staying hydrated, wearing the right clothing, making sure that your house is as well prepared as possible, which I think is really useful to me not only in trying to get this house buttoned up for the summer, but will also help in the winter when it gets cold out. And in the unfortunate case of the power going out from time to time. Definitely not something that I want to be subject to unplanned. So I will let you guys go so I can go finish covering up more of my windows, because it's going to get hot again this week. I'm sweaty.